Hi, I'm Jules. Welcome to this Forest Walk and Chat. If this is your first one, it's basically a podcast with some nice scenery. This one is an introduction to shadows and shadow work using a developmental perspective. A shadow is basically a bit of work that you haven't done yet in your development that you're resisting. It's like a hole or a gap in your development, often on a specific developmental line. And for an explanation of what developmental lines are, I have a video for that, and I will link it in the description below. A line of development that has a shadow will be stuck at the stage that the shadow is from. You can think of each line of development as a beam of light, and the shadow blocks the beam of light. The line of development can't progress past that stage until that bit of incomplete work is finished. This results in having some lines of development that are at stages earlier than your current center of gravity. And I also have a video that explains what a center of gravity is, and I will link that below as well. There's a difference between work that you simply haven't gotten to yet versus work that you're resisting. Work that you're resisting is a shadow. Work that you just haven't done yet may cause some tension because the rest of you is further ahead, and that causes a sense of tension. For example, it can feel like there's this area of your life that's pulling you backward, or it can feel like sometimes you aren't acting like your normal self. But resistance causes suffering. You are actively fighting your natural tendency to progress. Usually when using the term shadow, we're talking about a developmental line that's an area of life, but any developmental line can have unfinished work on it, including areas of life, intelligences, and skills. And having an intelligence or a skill that is significantly behind your current center of gravity can feel just as distressing. Shadows can also form just as easily in spiritual development stages. Also, lines of development are fractal, so a line of development with a shadow can be a big, broad category, like relationships in general, or it can be a smaller subcategory, like specifically relationships with people you live with. What shadows aren't? They aren't bad. They aren't failures. Having shadows doesn't mean that you're a bad person or that you've failed. Everyone has shadows. No one develops all of their developmental lines perfectly evenly. It is very, very normal to resist certain aspects of development. Shadows are completely normal. So what is shadow work? Basically, it's just going back and doing that unfinished work from previous stages. Doing that work removes the shadow, the block, and the beam of light can proceed. There are lots of types of work that might need to be done. Healing trauma, facing fears, dismantling limiting beliefs, installing new habits, or just finally making that change in your life that you've been avoiding making. And there are lots of different ways of getting that work done. There are contemplation techniques, psychotherapy techniques, hypnosis, shamanic journeys, various personal development tools, etc. So why bother with shadow work? Shadows only affect the conscious and the subconscious, and spiritual development results in eventually disidentifying with the whole conscious-subconscious system. So why bother fixing shadows? Why not just work on spiritual development to break free of them entirely? First, I want to mention that spiritual development practices can actually help make shadow work easier. They help you take your shadows less seriously so that they feel less scary and daunting. But there are also some very compelling reasons to do shadow work. I will list 5. Reason 1, shadow work helps with spiritual development. And if you do experience enlightenment, shadows can easily pull you back out of it. Reason 2, shadow work helps you progress your consciousness, and it is required for consciousness progression past coral. You can't get past coral stage without doing a significant amount of shadow work. Reason 3, the ego and subconscious don't go away even if you progress all the way to non-dual stage in your spiritual development. They are still your interface for interacting with this reality. So if you want a clear channel for your higher self or divinity to work through, you need to clean the channel up. Reason 4, manifested reality doesn't go away either. So long as you are still physically alive, you will still be in and experiencing manifested reality. And your ego and subconscious, as your interface for interacting with reality, affect how you experience it. If you have a lot of shadows, that experience will still be very uncomfortable. Neither consciousness progression nor spiritual progression make things better. Shadow work does. For example, your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health is directly related to your shadows and lack thereof. When you have lots of shadows, you will feel physically, mentally, emotionally, and/or spiritually unwell. Shadow work improves your health, and therefore your experience of manifested reality. And reason 5, shadow work gives you superpowers. Every stage in consciousness progression teaches a set of superpowers. When you skip some of the work from a stage, you're skipping gaining whichever superpowers get unlocked from that work. For example, red stage. A lot of people resist work from red stage because there's this sense in our culture that red stage is bad, but it's not. It's just a stage like any of the other consciousness progression stages, and it has some really important superpowers in it, one of which is your ability to advocate for yourself, to stand up for yourself. If you don't do some of the work from red stage, you might end up being a pushover, for example. There are lots of other examples. And every time you go back and do some of that shadow work, you unlock superpowers. How do you find your shadows? Some clues for where to look for shadows include things or people that you vehemently hate or that make you feel very angry. This is often a sign of projection. People whom you greatly admire or tend to put on pedestals. This is also often a sign of projection. This is positive projection instead of negative projection. Dreams that are scary or disturbing in some way, especially if they're recurring. Anything you want to hide about yourself. Limiting beliefs. Limiting beliefs in particular are often a sign of introjection, where you've taken on other people's beliefs. Addictions and addictive behaviors. Avoidant behaviors. Problems that keep repeating in your life. Areas of your life where you're not acting the way that you want to act. And triggers that bring some other side of you out that doesn't seem consistent with who you usually are. There are lots of other places to look for shadows, but that is a good list to get started with. And then, how do you do shadow work? On any line of development, the stages must be done in order. You can't skip stages, much as you might want to, which is why it doesn't work to try to force yourself to act like you're, for example, in green stage on a developmental line that's actually in red stage. What does work is to shift to the immediate next stage, for example, from red to blue, on that specific developmental line. This applies whether the developmental line is an area of your life, like relationships, health, sexuality, money, time management, spiritual development, etc., an intelligence, cognitive, emotional, spiritual, etc., or a specific skill, math, art, language learning, cooking, meditation, etc. An example of an area of life could be relationships with people I live with, I actually experienced this myself when I realized that this was an area of my life that was stuck in blue stage. And let's say your center of gravity is in green stage, but this area of your life is stuck in blue stage, you would need to move it to orange stage first instead of directly to green stage. Similarly, with a skill, if you have a skill that's in red stage, for example, you're at the dabbling phase, even if your center of gravity is in yellow, you still need to move that skill first from red to blue. So the next step in that skill is following instructions or doing methodical learning in that skill. You're not going to be able to just leap directly to being yellow stage in that skill. So how do you make that shift from one stage to the next on a developmental line that's stuck? As I mentioned earlier, there are lots of ways to do shadow work, and I intend to talk about this in more detail in other videos. But here are a few basic approaches that you can try out to start with. 1, use your conscious mind. For example, use the spiral dynamics model to logic it out. See if you can figure out which stage your shadow is from based on how you act and or what you believe in that area of your life. I have a video on finding your location in consciousness progression that you could also use to locate the stage that shadow is from, and I'll link that below. The example that I mentioned earlier about the area of my life called people I live with being stuck in blue stage, the way that I figured that out was I noticed that every time I had a conflict with my housemate, my gut reaction was to basically reestablish the rules and say this is how it must be done. And I was very rigid about it, which is also a blue stage quality, even though in the rest of my life I was very flexible. So that was an indication that that area of my life was stuck in blue stage. And then once you figured out what stage the shadow is from, assess what it might look like to come from the next stage in that area of your life. So taking my example, I realized that an orange stage version of that area of my life could involve negotiating with my housemate. So I asked my housemate if he would be up to that, and we started trying that out. We tried orange stage style negotiation. And then try it out, run experiments, document the results, iterate if necessary. So that's what it looks like to use your conscious mind to deal with a shadow. Number 2, another way is to work directly with your subconscious. For example, with hypnosis techniques. You can look up hypnosis videos on YouTube and find one that's relevant for the shadow that you're working on. You could find a hypnotherapist to work with you directly. I would advise finding one that you feel comfortable and safe working with, since this is very vulnerable work. And that can be very powerful. You can also do self-guided hypnosis or shamanic journey, choosing your own intention to set and letting your subconscious guide you. I have a playlist for doing that, which I'll also link below. For example, I have successfully used this method to ask my subconscious to help me resolve my issues around family. Yes, it can be that powerful. And 3, of course, you can always ask your higher self for guidance with whatever are your best methods for accessing your inner guidance. And that's it for this intro to shadows and shadow work. If you found this video helpful, please like it to let me know and to help others find it. Until next time, be well.